80% of runners get injured each year, and 40% of those injuries happen at the knee. While majority of injuries are overuse, it still can cause a visit to the doctor's office. The unfortunate truth is some doctors will tell you to just stop running. If it hurts, just stop doing it, because running is bad for your knees. Now, as a runner, you might be thinking, come on, there has to be another solution, and luckily there is. It's thought that running is bad for your knees because it can cause wear and tear, arthritis, cartilage damage, because every stride is more pounding on the knee. I'm sure you've heard you're just pounding pavement when you're running, but luckily this is not true. I'm Dr. Lisa, and today we're talking about what actually happens at the knee when you go running. I'm going to hypothesize here because I think that the stats have something to do with why we have talked about for years and years that running is bad for your knees. And then finally, the research has caught up with it, because I've heard running is bad for your knees for as long as I can remember. So I was a kid, so like 20 years ago. But luckily the research has our back runners. So I think a lot of this had to do with the stats, because if we're looking at 80% of runners getting injured each year, and then 40% of those injuries happening at the knee, I think, that's a big chunk. Majority of injuries do happen at the knee. And I think when doctors saw this and they were thinking, oh, then it has to be bad for your knees. Even though majority of the injuries that happen at the knees are patellofemoral pain syndrome or runner's knee or ITB syndrome, not even arthritis. Because if we think about the stats of heel striking, it's the same situation where 80% of runners get injured each year, and 80% of runners also heel strike. Now, this was before the research even had time to catch up with what they were hypothesizing, but I think, again, we used to think heel striking is really bad for us. It's not the way you should be running, and research has caught up and said, nope, that's not true. You should be running as natural as you can, and there's pros and cons to every foot strike. So I think that's my little hypothesis, but welcome back to another episode on the Rehab for Runners podcast. And today we are answering the question, is running bad for your knees, specifically your cartilage in your tibiofemoral joint? Running is one of the most high impact, non-contact, weight-bearing, full body sports. I mean, that's a mouthful. And with a weight-bearing sport or activity, you are loading your joints. And in between your joints, so your joints are made up of bones, ligaments, tendons, and cartilage. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but I'm just speaking in overall terms here to get to the point. So you have two bones that create a joint, and in between those bones, you have cartilage. Now, the role of the cartilage, I'm sure you've heard of knee cartilage, like your meniscus, but the whole role of this cartilage is to prevent wear and tear, because it acts as a cushion. So the bones don't mash into each other anytime that joint bears weight. So think about, when you're walking, your knee joint is going to bear weight, your ankle, your hip, even lumbar spine. So the cartilage helps to make sure that your bones don't hit each other and that joint can roll and glide and slide like it should. Now, the cartilage also helps to prevent shock, which is needed when we're running. So we can stay springy, as I like to say, into the next stride. We're not just landing and stuck there and then we have to push off again. It's a consecutive motion. We can stay springy into that next stride, and our momentum can then move forward. Now, as we run, the ground reaction force goes from our foot, our foot hits the ground, so it goes from our foot to our ankles, to our knees, to our hips, to our low back, all the way up. And that's assuming that all these joints are mobile and strong. So when that's the case, the shock can be dispersed. It's not just going through one area of the body. One of our main goals as our foot hits the ground, if we're trying to prevent injury and we're trying to work on an efficient running form is to allow our body to absorb the shock and disperse the shock. When we absorb the shock, that's one thing, but dispersing it means it's not just going through one area of the body. So if a joint is stiff or it's not as strong, then your body's going to compensate, and chances are that load or that force from the ground is going to go more towards that area of weakness or even stiffness, and over time that can cause an injury. But I want to bring this question back to a non-injured runner. Let's say you're training for a race, you're in your mid 40s or 50s, and you're thinking, okay, I've heard this before, I don't want to believe it, but I just want to make sure I'm not setting myself up for a knee replacement down the road or arthritis down the road, because I want to be able to keep walking and running and play with my kids or my grandkids later on. So that's what we're going to go over today. And let's just dive into the research, because you know I love research. So a lot of the research has said and shown that basically they're taking x-rays of these runners before they start running, and then after months and months. I mean, I think one study was up to 100 months. So basically years of running. And the x-rays are great. You don't need an MRI for this. The x-rays are great because they can show what's happening at the bone and at the cartilage. So they found no changes to the x-ray, which means it did not cause osteoarthritis and the cartilage is in good shape. If the cartilage wasn't in good shape, then you would see more arthritis, or basically the space between the two bones would be narrowing. And that just shows that the cartilage is not as good as it used to be. So they were able to compare it and they showed no changes, which is awesome for us runners. But let's talk about this a little bit more, because the next study is really interesting in what it found. So a bunch of studies said it's not bad for your knees, but this one study actually found that it improved knee osteoarthritis instead of worsening it, which is like a total 360, because how could this be the case? We were arguing that it didn't worsen arthritis, and now we're arguing that it can actually improve the arthritis. And this is a huge main, big picture idea, and we're going to talk about why running is actually not bad for your knees because of this idea. So the treatment for any sort of osteoarthritis, whether it's at your knee or your hip, I'm just saying those two because they're usually the most common, like a knee replacement or a hip replacement. But the treatment is weight-bearing activities that the patient can tolerate. So when you're in weight-bearing, think you're standing up, you're bearing weight through your legs, you load the bone, which strengthens the bone, as long as you don't overload it. I'm going to say this again. You load the bone when you're in weight bearing, which strengthens the bone because our bone regenerates every, I believe, 6 to 8 weeks, as long as you don't overload it. So this is the exact reason running is not bad for your knees, because you're loading the bone and cartilage without overloading it, and it will get stronger. And this comes down to Wolff's Law. I don't know if you've heard of Wolff's Law. It's a big thing in the PT world. It just means bone adapts to stress, so it will remodel and become thicker and stronger in order to resist loads. Now, the big asterisk here is that you don't overload it, because when we think of overloading a bone, we think of a stress fracture. So that means slowly increasing your mileage when you start to train for a race. It doesn't mean just go as far as you can, as much as you can, because that bone will just learn to adapt. No, this happens pretty slow. It's a slow process, 6 to 8 weeks, but that's kind of besides the point. That just means your bone remodels every 6 to 8 weeks. You know, you break a bone, you're in a cast for 6 to 8 weeks. But this is saying that your body will learn to adapt to the load, and therefore it will become stronger as long as you don't overload it. Now, this is really important, because this is great for the running community. This is great for just peace of mind, knowing that you won't necessarily need a knee replacement because you're a runner. And Wolff's Law is really like the whole idea of Wolff's Law is really the case for rehabbing an injury or strength training as well, because your body is going to learn to adapt to whatever you put it through as long as you slowly progress yourself into that adaptation. Think about strength training. If you start off squatting with 10-pound dumbbells, eventually that's going to get easier. Your body has adapted to that weight. Your muscles are stronger, your tendons are stronger, your joints are stronger, and now you can eventually lift 15 pounds when you're squatting. So it's the same idea. Your body learns to adapt. But speaking of strength training, you want to load your joints and your cartilage so they can become stronger, but you don't want to overload your joint. Now, this means paying attention to your training plan. I know, I've been there. I have increased my mileage 0 to 100, and you bet my joints were aching. And you bet I got injured too. So it's really important. That's why that 10% mileage rule comes in. Research really shows it's no more than 30%. So you're not increasing your weekly mileage by more than 30%, because it can cause an injury not only at your muscles and your tissues, but also increasing that risk for a stress fracture and paying attention to your strength training. Now, if the whole idea behind rehabbing osteoarthritis is with weight-bearing activities, it's the same exact idea for prehabbing it or trying to prevent osteoarthritis from happening at your knees. So when you're strength training, I've said this before and I'll say it again, you want to be doing majority of your exercises in weight bearing, because one, they're more specific to running. You're not laying down when you're running. You're not on your stomach when you're running. Now, there's nothing wrong with a couple activity or exercises being done in sideline or on your stomach, but majority of the exercises that you do should be done in weight bearing. And they should also address the stability of the knee and strengthening the knee. I feel like weight bearing and running is just one part of having a strong knee or strong knees. You also have to strengthen the muscles and tendons around the joint in order to really prevent injuries from happening at the knee. So this is going to look like strengthening your quads, your hip flexors, your hamstrings, your adductors, your sartorius, your gracilis, your glutes, and your calves. And there's plenty more, but there's a lot of muscles that contribute to the stability of the knee and the strength of the knee. If you are loading the knee joint and you don't have strength, you are going to be more at risk for developing an overuse injury or even arthritis down the road, just because you don't have the strength to offload that joint. And it really comes back to, how does your body absorb the shock? How does your body disperse the shock? If it's not able to go through your quads and your hamstrings and your glutes and be equally distributed, then it's going to basically be loading the joint, and that's going to cause that overuse, which can cause an injury down the road. So that's why super important to be strength training, and super important to also have a plan when you're strength training, because it can be very overwhelming. You might be thinking, I've never even heard of the gracilis muscle. I've never even heard of the sartorius muscle. And they're very important muscles for running. So that's why, you could do this on your own. You could make your strength plan on your own. You could write out your entire workout, but it might be overwhelming. Actually, it probably will be overwhelming, thinking about all the muscles that you have to work when you're strength training in order to stabilize the knee and strengthen the knee and work on power of the knee and the stability of the knee. I mean, there's a lot of science that should go into a strength plan, and you don't want to have to think about, an hour and a half workout just to get every muscle group in and working on the stability and the mobility. I mean, if you have the time, then that's fine, and you can definitely write it on your own, but I'm big on saving time. I think time is money. I'd rather save my time, have someone tell me what to do, and be able to keep myself accountable with that program. Especially if you have big running goals, you want to prevent injuries this year, you want to run stronger, you want to also maybe increase your speed, then you should get a program that is proven to work, like the Runner's Complete program. Now, you don't have to use this program, but do find yourself a program that is specific to running and addresses all aspects of running, including stabilizing the knee, working on the strength of the knee and the power of the knee, or else you're not going to get all the benefits of strength training that will carry over into your running. Now, I'm biased. I think the Runner's Complete program is the best program on the market for strength training and mobility. And it saves you time. You don't have to think about what to do. You just open the app, you see me demonstrating an exercise, and you're given the reps and sets. So you know exactly what exercises to do that day for strength training and exactly what exercises to do after your run for mobility. Now, if you want to try it for yourself, I'll link it below. But the whole idea is that you aren't only loading the knee when you're running, but you're also loading it when you are strength training. The more weight you can lift, the stronger your joints and muscles will be. Same with running. The more mileage that you can get your body adapted to, the stronger your joints and your muscles and your cartilage will be. All right, that concludes this episode. I hope you send it to a running friend that you think would enjoy this. I really would appreciate that, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.